Sometime today, maybe an hour ago, maybe just before you lay down, you reached for something before you knew you'd decided to. Your phone, most likely. Your hand was already moving toward it, while the thought of checking it was still forming. And by the time you caught yourself, the screen was lit, and your thumb was sliding, and whatever waited, there was a little less than the reaching had promised. You felt the small drop of it, even if you didn't stop to name it. The thing you wanted, once you had it, was quieter than the wanting had been. And you thought nothing of that. You set the phone down, and a while later, you reached again, the same way, for the same not quite. It happened with the message you'd been waiting for, the one that finally came and was only words. It happened again with the meal you'd been thinking about since noon. Wonderful for 3 bites, and then just food. None of it struck you as strange, because all of it is ordinary, and the ordinary is the last thing any of us ever stops to examine. All of it comes out of a little under 1.5 kilograms of folded tissue, sitting in complete darkness behind your eyes, something that has never once been touched by light and never will be, and yet produces every bright thing you have ever seen. That gap between the wanting and the having is not a flaw in you. It may be the most honest thing your brain does. It is also the first clue to a mistake that nearly everyone makes about what is happening in there. There is a single substance inside that dark organ that has been blamed for more of your life than any other. It turns up in the headlines and the wellness videos and the jokes we make about ourselves. The thing that supposedly floods you when you taste the chocolate, win the argument, hear the phone buzz. You already know its name. Dopamine. Somewhere along the way, it became our one-word account of desire and pleasure and craving and joy, the chemical we point to when we want to say we couldn't help ourselves. And almost everything in that story is wrong. We should be careful with the word pleasure here, because it is the word that has done the most damage. For decades, the people who actually record this molecule, who watch it move, cell by cell, in living brains, have understood something that never quite reached the rest of us. The thing you felt this evening, the wanting that ran out ahead of the having and then quietly outlasted it, is the molecule's true signature. Its real home is the reach, far more than the thing reached for. It drives the pursuit, and then, at the very moment you arrive, it hands you over to a different system altogether, a smaller, quieter one that has been mistaken for it again and again. You can want something with your whole body and feel almost nothing when it finally comes. You can be pulled, night after night, towards something that stopped pleasing you a long time ago and reach for it anyway. So you are a stranger creature than you have been told. The gap you crossed 12 times today without ever looking down, that is the door we are standing in front of tonight. Before we go any further, one small thing. If a slow, careful walk through the machinery you are made of feels like something worth making, the subscribe button does more for a channel like this than almost anything else. And there is one thing worth hearing from you, if you're willing. Somewhere in the comments, leave a note about a time you wanted something badly, finally got it, and found that the wanting had been bigger than the having. Those answers say more than most of the data does. For now, let yourself settle. Let your jaw come unclenched. It has been working harder than it needed to, and your breathing will slow on its own from here, without anything from you. There is really only one question worth carrying down into the dark tonight, and it is quieter than you might expect. If this molecule was never truly about pleasure, then where on earth did we ever get the idea that it was? It started with a rat that would not leave one corner of a table alone. The rat had a fine wire running into its brain, finer than a hair, and every time it wandered into that particular corner, the man watching pressed a button and sent a small current down the wire. A current so slight, it should have meant almost nothing. The rat stopped, turned, and came back to the corner, and when he pressed again, it came back faster. Within a few minutes, he found that he could move the animal anywhere he liked across that tabletop. just by waiting until it stepped in the right direction and then giving it the briefest pulse. Show an animal a shock, and it runs. This rat crossed the table to meet the current, again and again, hunting down the very thing it should have been fleeing, and the man with the button realized with a slow prickle of astonishment that he was steering a living creature around a table like a toy, using nothing but a spot somewhere deep in its head. This was 1954, in a basement laboratory at McGill University in Montreal. The man with the button was a young researcher named James Olds, working alongside a colleague named Peter Milner, and the honest truth, the part that makes the whole story slightly absurd, is that Olds had not meant to put the wire anywhere near where it ended up. He had been aiming for a different region entirely. The electrode had bent off its intended path on the way in and come to rest near a small structure close to the brain's midline, a place called the septal area. A surprising amount of what people still believe about pleasure rests on the fact that one wire, in one rat, went slightly off course in a basement 70 years ago. What the two of them did next is the part that changed everything. Rather than steer the rat themselves, they handed the rat the controls. They built a small box with a lever in it and wired that lever to the same place in the brain, so that each time the rat pressed, it sent the current into itself. No experimenter, no timing, nothing at all standing between the animal and its own reward. Then they stepped back to see what a creature would do once it could reach directly into its own head. It pressed the lever. Then it pressed it again. And then it did very little else for as long as they were willing to let it. In the paper they published that year, one that would become among the most cited in the young science of the brain, Olds and Milner described rats working the lever at a steady, almost clockwork rhythm. For some of the sites they tried, the animals pressed it around 2,000 times an hour, roughly once every couple of seconds, hour after hour after hour. When they were hungry, they pressed instead of eating. When they were thirsty, they pressed instead of drinking. A nursing mother left her pups in the nest and came back to the lever. In the experiments that grew out of this one, rats would cross a metal grid wired to shock their feet, taking the pain step by step, just to reach the lever on the far side, and once there, would press until they collapsed, rest, and begin again. To the rat, nothing else in the room existed. The food, the water, its own young, the floor that hurt, all of it had thinned into background. Only the corner of the table was real. Normally, the world is what closes that circuit. A good meal, a warm body, a problem worked out. Each one sends a brief pulse through that deep pathway, and then it's over, and the animal goes back to living. What the lever did was let the rat close the circuit itself, directly, with nothing in between, over and over, while the meal and the mate and the problem never came at all. The whole machinery of a life fell away, and what was left, naked, was the pressing. You have a version of that same circuit threaded through the middle of your own brain, and it is running right now, quietly, beneath everything else you're doing. It is the reason you can look at that rat and feel something more uncomfortable than pity, a small, unwelcome flicker of recognition. You already know what it is to return to the same action long after it has stopped giving you very much. The same screen reached for again, the same thought circled back to, the same nothing checked and rechecked. The rat simply had a shorter, straighter path to its lever than you have to yours. To almost everyone who saw these results, the meaning seemed beyond argument. A creature that will starve sooner than stop pressing a button must be pressing because the button feels good. What other reason could there be? The brain, it appeared, kept pleasure in particular places you could find with a wire, and Olds, over the years that followed, gave them the name that would cling to them for the rest of the century. Pleasure centers. It was an irresistible phrase, and it travelled far past the laboratory, into textbooks and magazines and the ordinary way people learned to talk about their own minds. Here, at last, seemed to be the seat of joy, marked on a map. And the idea was so satisfying partly because it promised something we badly wanted to be true, that happiness was a place, and that a place could be found and reached and switched on. And here is the quiet flaw that would take the field decades to fully face. In all of it, no one had measured a single moment of pleasure. They had measured a rat that would not stop. The wanting was right there, plain and tireless, 2,000 presses an hour. The pleasure was something laid gently over the top of the wanting, an explanation rather than an observation, because what else, people reasoned, could drive a creature to work so hard for something none of them could see? The circuit the lever was firing, it would turn out much later, runs along the very same deep pathway that carries dopamine up from the base of the brain. That is how, years afterward, once the chemistry was finally untangled, the molecule and the myth came to be quietly welded into one. The pleasure center became the pleasure chemical. The wire became a word that, until perhaps an hour ago, you very likely thought you understood. So this is the place the idea was born, and you can hear even now how reasonable it sounded. All over the world tonight, in the dark, inside millions of skulls, that same deep circuit is being pressed, these days with a screen, a habit, a small thought that keeps coming back rather than a lever in a box. Most of the people pressing would call it a search for pleasure. Almost none of them are finding much. The lever and the liking came apart a very long time ago, and most of us have never once noticed the gap between them. You, at this moment, are doing the rarer thing. You are setting the lever down, letting the pressing go quiet, letting yourself sink, slowly, away from all of it, towards sleep. It came apart most clearly of all, though, not in any rat, but in the first human beings, to have that same fine wire lowered into that same place inside their own living heads. Because a person, unlike a rat, can be asked what it feels like in there, and a person can answer. The man sat with a small metal box resting in his lap, and on the box there were buttons, and one of those buttons he pressed far more than the others. A wire ran from under the bandage on his head down into the box, and each time he pressed that one button, a small current travelled back up the wire to a spot deep in the middle of his brain, the same region, near the midline, that had turned a rat in a Montreal basement into a creature that would not leave one corner alone. Only this time the creature at the button was a person, a young man in his 20s, in a hospital in New Orleans in the early 1970s, and when the people running the experiment told him the session was over and reached to take the box from his hands, he asked them, more than once, if he could press it just a few more times. B19, the records kept his real name out of it, had come to the psychiatrist Robert Heath in genuine distress. He was depressed to the edge of suicide. He had seizures. His world had narrowed to almost nothing. Heath, at Tulane University, had spent years doing in human beings what had first been done in rats, lowering fine electrodes into the deep country of the brain and letting his patients send the current into themselves. He was certain he had found in us the very thing the animal studies had promised, a seat of pleasure, locatable, switchable, his to map. He even gave the work a title that said so out loud. Pleasure, he wrote, and brain activity in man. And Heath was no fringe figure muttering at the edge of the field. He chaired his department. He was published and taken seriously, and that is exactly the part that should unsettle us. At first, B19 looked like proof. Given the box, he pressed the septal button in plain preference to all the others. The case report describes him pressing it in a single 3-hour sitting, on the order of 1,500 times, returning to it every few seconds across the whole afternoon, the way the rat had returned to its corner. Each press brought him only a flicker of current, a fraction of a second of stimulation, and a fraction of a second is not very long to feel good. So he pressed again and again, trying to build something lasting out of slivers of time that refused to add up. When the session was ended, he did not sit back, sated, the way a person does after enough of a good thing. He wanted it to go on. Heath read all of this as pleasure, and for the better part of 30 years, almost everyone read it the same way. But look at what the man actually did, rather than the word laid over it, and a different picture forms. the one the researchers who later returned to these cases would insist on. A real pleasure has a shape in time. It builds, it crests, and then it lets you go, the way a good meal ends in fullness and you push the plate away. What B19 had never let him go. The button gave him arousal, alertness, a loose warmth, and beneath all of it, a single rising demand to press again, and every press fed that demand instead of answering it. By Heath's own account, the current could keep the young man at the button for hours, full of urge, and yet the satisfaction it seemed to promise was never in the button itself, that he had to find by other means. The switch delivered the wanting. It could not deliver the having. Whatever that was, it was not joy. A man full of joy sits back, done. This one leaned in and asked for more, and the compulsion that looked like the surest proof of pleasure was, read correctly, the surest proof of its absence. There is a harder part of B19's story, and it would be a small cowardice to leave it out. He had not walked into that laboratory as a free man making a free choice. He had come to Heath tangled up with the courts, and the line between patient and subject was never honestly held. Heath's deeper aim, moreover, was not only to study B19's brain, but to alter something in him that needed no altering. B19 was drawn to men, and in those years the profession still wrote that down as a sickness, a classification that would be struck from its own manual the very next year. Heath used the electrode, together with a sexual encounter staged and paid for inside the lab, to try to turn the young man's desire toward women. It did not work, and it never should have been tried. Within a couple of years, this whole line of work would be summoned before a committee of the United States Senate. The science took a great deal from B19 and handed him very little in return, and the least we owe him now is to tell his part of it plainly. You will never have a wire lowered into the middle of your own head, and you will never hold a box of buttons in your lap. But the engine that drove B19 is not a rare or a broken one. It is standard issue, and it is in you, running tonight the way it runs every night. You have felt, in a far gentler key, the exact thing he felt. The late reach for one more of something you already know will not be enough. The small action that feeds the wanting rather than settling it. The wire only made plain and unbearable what the rest of us carry quietly and call ordinary life. What separates him from you is degree and a great deal of luck, not kind. His case should have been the warning, decades ahead of time. If a man can press a button marked pleasure 1,500 times in an afternoon, want it badly when it is taken away and still come nowhere near being satisfied, then the word on the button was wrong from the beginning. But a human being with an electrode in his head can only be asked soft questions and give soft answers. He can say it felt good, or that he wanted more, and you are left to guess which one is true. Settling it would take a stricter kind of experiment, one that could pull the wanting and the liking apart cleanly enough to watch them move on their own and weigh each by itself, without anyone having to say a word. Right now, as you lie here, that same deep circuit sits in your skull, quiet for once. No one is handing you a button. The wanting that ran you all through the day, toward the screen, the meal, the small refreshable nothing, is loosening its hold at last, and you are letting it, which is the one thing B19 in that room was never allowed to do. Notice how little you want anything at all just now. That quiet is not the system switched off. It is the system itself, finally standing down for the night, and the experiment that would take the word pleasure apart at last, that would show wanting and liking to be two different things wearing one name, needed no wire and no human being, and not a single spoken word. It needed only a little sugar, a few rats, and someone patient enough to sit and watch a face. A single drop of sugar water touches the tongue of a rat, and the small face answers the way faces have answered sweetness for an extraordinarily long time. The tongue slides out in a slow, rhythmic motion and laps at the lips. The mouth works again and again with something that looks unmistakably like contentment. It is the same face a human infant makes the first time something sweet reaches its tongue, the features loosening, the little tongue starting to move, and the same a chimpanzee makes, and a monkey, and this rat on a table in a laboratory in Michigan. There is a name for what the face is doing. It is liking, in the plainest sense of the word, and it can be read straight off an animal that will never speak a sentence in its life. This is the basis of a method called the taste reactivity test, and its simplicity is the whole point. Put something sweet in an animal's mouth, and this is what comes: the rhythmic tongue, the licking, the soft, satisfied working of the jaw. Put in something bitter instead, a drop of quinine, and the opposite comes: a whole vocabulary of disgust, the mouth gaping open, the head shaking, the paws flicking as if to push the taste away. What astonishes is how far down and how far across these two faces reach. The pleasure face and the disgust face are so nearly identical in a newborn human, an orangutan, a rat, and a mouse that the photographs are genuinely hard to tell apart. Somewhere far back, before these lineages ever split, evolution settled on a way for a face to say yes, more of this, and no, never that, and it has barely revised the gesture since. Which meant that, for the first time, there was a way to measure pleasure honestly, not by asking, the way Heath could only ask, but by filming a face and counting what it did. Now go back to that contented rat with the moving tongue and add the single fact left out of the picture. In the weeks before that drop of sugar, its brain had been emptied of dopamine. The dopamine pathways running up into its forebrain had been destroyed, very nearly all of them, up to 99% gone. By the theory everyone was still working from, this animal had had its pleasure chemical taken away and should have met the sugar with a shrug, and it had, in fact, lost something enormous. Left to itself, it would no longer feed. It had to be kept alive by hand because the drive to eat had simply gone out of it, and it would otherwise have sat beside a full dish and wasted away. Yet the liking was perfectly intact. The face did the full sweet-tasting dance, not 1 degree fainter than a healthy rat's. Strip out nearly all of the dopamine, and the pleasure stays precisely where it was. This was the work of Kent Berridge and Terry Robinson, and it is, quietly, one of the most disruptive results in the whole science of reward. Though almost nothing about the way the rest of us kept talking would suggest anyone had noticed. If that experiment took the dopamine out and found the liking still standing, a second one, in a different lab, pushed the same logic to its limit, and it may be the harder of the two to forget. The geneticist, Richard Palmiter, and his colleagues engineered mice whose brains could not make dopamine at all. Where the rats had lost almost all of theirs, these mice had none, a clean and total absence from birth. The mice could taste and they could feel, and the machinery for moving was all in place, and they would not eat. Set down in a cage stocked with everything a mouse could want, they sat, and if no one stepped in, they starved to death in the middle of plenty. They could taste the food perfectly well, and they liked it as much as any mouse. What they could not do was summon the wanting required to cross the cage and take it. A daily injection of L-dopa, the raw material a brain turns into dopamine, switched them on for a few hours. They would rouse, eat, drink, move about like ordinary mice, and then, as it faded, sink back into stillness. And in the narrow windows when they could be coaxed to taste, the cleanest proof of all arrived. These dopamine-less mice still preferred sweet water to plain, still learned which spout was which, still liked exactly what they had always liked. Every part of reward was whole in them, but one, the will to go and get it. Set the two experiments beside each other, and the conclusion is hard to escape, however much we might have preferred the older, simpler one. Pleasure and the pull toward pleasure are two different things, and they do not run on the same chemistry. Take the dopamine away, and the liking remains. The sugar is still sweet, the face still glad. What falls apart is the wanting, the reaching, the pursuit, the willingness to rise and cross the room. Berridge gave the two halves the honest, almost childishly plain names they had earned, liking for the pleasure itself and wanting for the engine that carries us toward it. The brain builds them on separate machinery, set side by side, close enough that for the better part of a century we took the two of them for one. Once the seam is visible, it turns up everywhere. The rat at its lever and the man with his button were wanting with the liking stripped clean away, pressing and pressing, never arriving. The starving mouse is the mirror held up to them, liking with the wanting gone, sitting calm and unbothered beside the food that could have saved its life. And here is where it stops being about rats and mice. You carry both of these animals inside you, and you have felt them come apart far more often than you ever noticed. There are evenings when something you genuinely love is right there in front of you, a book, a person, a piece of music, and you feel no pull toward it at all, only a flat reluctance to begin, even knowing that the moment you start, you'll be glad you did. That is the mouse beside the food, the liking whole, the wanting offline. And there is the other kind of night, the one this whole story opened on, reaching again and again for something that gives almost nothing back, wanting with no liking left beneath it. Both creatures are you, and have been more times than you could count. You were simply never handed two words for the difference, so you made do with one, and called the whole confusing business pleasure. Of the two machines, it is the wanting that has run you all day, the one that kept you reaching, refreshing, getting up to check. It is also the one that tires first. Lying here now, you can feel it slowing, the reaching going weak, the pull toward the next thing thinning out, until wanting nothing at all feels less like emptiness and more like ease. The liking does not have to switch off for you to sleep. It can idle on quietly in the dark, the way it went on idling in that rat and that mouse no matter what was done to them. What sleep takes away is the wanting. The engine that spent the whole day insisting you get up and go and reach is finally, gratefully, allowed to stop. That leaves a single question open, and it is a quiet enough one to fall asleep inside of. If the pleasure was never in the dopamine, if the liking kept glowing in a brain scraped nearly bare of it, then the gladness has to be made somewhere. Some other place, some other chemistry is doing the real work of pleasure. We have found the wanting. The liking is still hiding in a far smaller, far stranger room than anyone thought to look in. A pleasure, the first square of chocolate going soft before it's even chewed, the first warm mouthful on a cold night, seems to happen everywhere at once, and nowhere in particular. It has no edges. It feels less like an event in one place than like a quality the whole moment has briefly taken on. So it comes as a small shock to learn that pleasure has an address, an actual location in the tissue of the brain, and that the address is almost insultingly small. Once it was clear that the liking and the wanting were two separate things, the obvious move was to go and find where the liking itself was made, and Kent Berridge's lab spent years doing precisely that, with the patience the work demanded. They used the same wordless measure as before, the face an animal makes at a taste. Point by point, the way an explorer charts an unknown coastline, they worked through the reward circuitry, placing a tiny dab of the brain's own opioids, its homemade, morphine-like chemistry, at one location after another, then offering a drop of sugar and watching whether the liking grew or shrank. Most of the time, nothing happened. The dab went in, the sugar came, and the face liked it exactly as much as ever. But in one particular place, the liking doubled. A patch in the upper front corner of a structure called the nucleus accumbens, a hub buried deep in the forebrain, turned out to work like an amplifier for pleasure. A dab of opioid there, and a rat's response to sugar leapt to twice its usual strength. The same sweet drop, suddenly twice as good. The brain's own cannabis-like chemistry, placed in the same spot, did it too. And the patch is tiny. In a rat, it measures about a cubic millimetre, roughly a grain of coarse sand, and it accounts for only about a tenth of the accumbens. The other 90% of that structure can do nothing of the sort. Pleasure, in other words, is hoarded in a single speck, while the rest of that vast structure can add nothing to it. Stranger still, the gift is local to the point of cruelty. Slide a couple of millimeters back from that spot into what the researchers came to call a cold spot, and the very same dab of opioid does the reverse. It cuts the liking roughly in half. One chemistry, two patches of tissue almost touching, opposite results. Pleasure doubled in one, halved a sand grain's distance away. The brain's capacity for enjoyment, then, is both minute and precarious, doubled by the right speck of tissue, undone by one a hair's breadth away. You can feel the near side of this right now, if you go looking for it. The quiet comfort of lying still with the day finally behind you. The small, real pleasure of warmth and weight and nothing left to do seems to settle over your whole body like a kind of atmosphere. In fact, it is being made, this very moment, in a patch of your own brain. You could hide beneath a grain of sand. Everything that pleasure seems to be, its spread, its softness, the sense that it fills you completely, is the work of a fleck of tissue that would fit on the head of a pin. The vastness is all in the feeling. The thing that produces it is almost nothing at all. Nor is it the only such place. Lower down sits a second amplifier, in a region called the ventral pallidum, about the same impossible smallness and doing the same work, and this one may be the most important pleasure spot in the entire brain because of what happens when it is harmed. Damage the others and liking dims. Damage this one and liking flips over completely. The sugar that drew the contented tongue now draws the gape of disgust, and sweetness itself becomes something the animal labours to spit out. A few more of these specks are scattered about, one down in the brainstem, maybe one or two in the cortex, but that is nearly all of them. The capacity to find anything good in the world rests, in large part, on a sliver of tissue a few millimeters across, and injuring that sliver can turn the sweetness of things into its opposite. Set all of this beside the wanting, and the lopsidedness is almost hard to bear. The wanting, the dopamine, the pull, the engine, is generated by a vast and sprawling system, spread across great reaches of the brain, sturdy and hard to silence. The liking is the opposite in every dimension. It is made in a handful of specks you could lose under a fingernail. Even scaled up to our own larger brains, the best guess for one of these human hotspots is something near a cubic centimetre, about the size of a sugar cube. That is the room. That is where the gladness of being alive is actually assembled. A sugar cube of tissue, give or take, doing the quietest and most necessary work in the head, while the enormous machinery of wanting roars away all around it. The system that drives the going and getting is broad and sturdy. The system that makes the getting feel worth it is a few grains of sand. No wonder the wanting so often outruns the liking. It was always the bigger and the tougher of the two. So here is something to drift on, with no need to answer it. Of the two, the sprawling wanting and the sugar cube of liking, which do you suppose is still with you, here at the very end of the day? The wanting has mostly let go by now. You can feel that. The reaching gone soft and far away. But the liking asks for so little. That small ease in you this moment, the contentment of warmth and dark and weight, does it take any effort from you at all to keep it glowing? Or is that fleck of tissue simply doing it on its own, the way it did in a rat with no dopamine left? The way it will keep doing long after you have stopped listening and slipped under? It will keep its quiet vigil down there either way. The wanting, though, the dopamine, the sprawling system that has been the real subject all along, never holds still. It sweeps in pulses across huge territories of the brain, second by second, awake or asleep. And for the longest time, no one could say what those pulses were actually tracking. When a way was finally found to watch the signal move, in an animal sitting quietly and waiting for a sip of juice, it turned out to be doing something far stranger than wanting. Those pulses are moving through your brain right now as you lie here in the dark. The same dopamine this whole story has been circling, sweeping out across the tissue every few seconds, awake or asleep. The easy assumption, the one almost everyone made for a long time, is that each pulse is a small announcement of something good. Here is reward, here is the thing worth having. But there is a question hiding under that assumption. If dopamine simply marked good things, it would have to fire every time a good thing arrived, every expected comfort, every pleasure you already saw coming. So what is the signal actually answering to as it flares and falls? The person who found out spent years in a quiet room listening to single cells, one at a time. His name is Wolfram Schultz, and his real instrument was patience. He worked with monkeys, lowering an electrode so fine it could eavesdrop on a single dopamine neuron and catch each time it fired. On a rig like his, you don't only see those firings on a screen, you hear them played through a loudspeaker as a string of sharp little pops, and at rest, a dopamine cell pops along slowly and irregularly, a few times a second, an unhurried tick deep in the midbrain. Then Schultz gave the monkey small rewards, a drop of juice or a morsel of food, and listened to what the ticking did. One early setup was almost comically plain, a little box with a spring-loaded door the monkey could open for a treat. The door flew up with a sharp pluck, and at that moment, at the treat, the dopamine cells lit up, all of them. A sudden hard burst where a second before there had been only the slow tick. It looked exactly like confirmation. Reward arrives, the cells flare. Dopamine is the chemistry of good things. Case closed. Except it did not stay closed. As the monkey learned the task, as the box and the door and the treat hardened into routine, the bursts began to fade, though the treat itself was as good as ever, and the monkey still took it, still ate it, still wanted it. The dopamine cells that had blazed at the surprise of the reward now barely stirred when the same reward came on schedule. The light that flared for the treat went quiet over the very thing it used to flare at. And this is the detail that should have toppled the simple story where it stood. A signal that announced rewards would announce them every single time. This one didn't. It went dark for a reward you saw coming. So where had the firing gone? It had moved, jumped backward in time, away from the reward and onto whatever reliably came before it. Once a light or a sound came to mean juice is coming, the cells flared at the light, at the announcement, and held their silence at the juice itself. The flash had relocated from the prize to the first honest hint of the prize. The brain had stopped lighting up for the reward and started lighting up for the news. And then came the most elegant result of all, the one that turned a curiosity into something like a law. Once the monkey had learned that the light meant juice, Schultz would sometimes break the promise. The light came, the monkey waited, and the juice did not arrive. At the exact instant the drop was due, not a moment before or after, the dopamine cells dropped below even their slow, resting tick, down into a precise little notch of darkness, carved out of the baseline at the very moment the world failed to deliver. That is a stranger feat than it sounds. The brain had been counting on something, and when it didn't come, the signal marked the absence, registered the non-arrival of a thing that never happened, as exactly and as punctually as it had once marked the arrival. Lay the three findings side by side, and the pattern is unmistakable. A reward better than the brain expected made the cells burst into a flare of light. A reward exactly as predicted left them ticking on as though the moment were empty. And a reward that fell short or failed to come pulled them down into that notch of dark. What the dopamine signal tracked, it turned out, was the difference between what the brain predicted and what the world actually delivered. The gap, the error, the sheer size of the surprise. The name the field settled on for it is a reward prediction error, the distance between the reward you expected and the reward you got. Reward itself, the thing everyone had assumed dopamine was about, had almost nothing to do with it. Dopamine, the famous molecule of pleasure, turned out to be something far closer to a running measure of how wrong the brain was about to be. This is genuinely hard to hold in mind even now. The most talked about chemical in the brain, the thing we blame for our cravings and our weaknesses, the supposed essence of pleasure itself. And at its core, it is a subtraction, a difference, an error term of the kind you'd expect in the margin of an engineer's notebook, rather than at the root of desire. How does something that abstract, a measure of the distance between a guess and an outcome, become the most insistent physical thing we know, the pull that gets a body up out of a chair and across a room? The felt force of wanting and the cold arithmetic of the signal have never been entirely reconciled. They are both true at once and stranger for it, and once you can see it, you start to feel it everywhere in your own days. That thing you looked forward to all week, which came and went and was merely fine, that was the light holding steady, reality landing just where you'd forecast it, no error worth reporting. An unexpected kindness that lifts you out of nowhere is a flare. A small sinking when something good falls a little short of the picture you'd built of it is a dip. Your brain quietly noting the distance between the promise and the thing. All the weather of anticipation and letdown you move through hour after hour is this one signal, brightening and dimming as the world keeps beating or missing the quiet, constant forecasts you never knew you were making. Tonight, none of it fully switches off. As you sleep, your brain will go on making its small predictions and noting its small errors, unwatched. A dream that turns a corner you didn't see coming. A sound from the street it half forecast and checked against the dark. And in the morning, before you are properly awake, before a single conscious thought has formed, one of the very first things your brain will do is run this exact calculation. It will weigh the world it wakes into against the world it expected, and somewhere down in the quiet, a flare or a dip will mark the difference. You will not notice it. You never have. The day will already have been measured before you open your eyes, which only sharpens the question Schultz's beautiful result leaves behind. A brain that spends every waking second measuring the gap between what it expected and what it got, flaring at surprise, darkening at disappointment, is plainly doing something with all that arithmetic. A brain does not keep score of its own errors for nothing. An error is the first move in a correction, the opening of a longer process. So what is the brain correcting? What is all this surprise actually for? The answer is that the surprise is for teaching, and the teaching never stops. Every one of those flares and dips is more than a report on how the world turned out. It is an instruction, a small correction fired out to the rest of the brain, telling it to expect a little more of whatever just beat the forecast, and a little less of whatever fell short. And it is happening now, in the dark behind your eyes, even as you lie here doing nothing but listening. A quiet, ceaseless tutoring you have never once felt. Its rule is almost startlingly simple. When the world comes in better than predicted and the dopamine flares, the brain strengthens whatever led up to that moment, the cue, the choice, the action, tagging it as worth repeating and worth expecting. When the world falls short and the signal dips, the brain does the reverse, quietly weakening that same path and lowering its hopes for it. And when reality lands exactly where it was predicted and the signal holds steady, nothing changes at all because nothing needs to. The brain's picture of the world was already right. Surprise is the only thing worth learning from. No surprise, no lesson. This is what you were watching earlier, when the dopamine burst crept backward from the juice to the light that promised it. That migration was the learning itself, caught in the act. With every trial, the brain got a little better at predicting the juice from the cue, so the juice grew less and less surprising, until, fully expected, it stopped producing any error at all, and the signal fell silent over it. Meanwhile, the cue, the first genuinely unpredictable thing in the sequence, became the new home of surprise. The error had done its work. It taught the brain to see the reward coming, and then, its lesson delivered, it faded to nothing. A prediction error that has shrunk to zero is the signature of something fully understood. You can feel the same process in your own body, in all the places where it has already finished its work. Reach for a light switch in a room you've lived in for years, and your hand finds it in the dark without a flicker of thought. No error, no correction, nothing left to learn because the prediction is perfect. But think back to your first week in that home, when your hand kept going to the wrong wall, to where a switch had been in some earlier place. Each wrong reach was a small dip, a little jolt of being wrong, and each one nudged the prediction a few centimeters truer until one day the reaching went quiet and sure. The lurch you feel stepping onto a stair that isn't there is the same thing turned inside out, a prediction of solid ground, met by empty air, an error so abrupt your whole body flinches before a thought can form. Your skills, your habits, the 1,000 smooth automatic motions of an ordinary day are all old prediction errors that have been worn down to silence. What makes the rule extraordinary is where else it has turned up. A few years after Schultz mapped the dopamine response, 3 scientists, Reed Montague, Peter Dayan, and Terry Sejnowski, looked at his recordings and recognized something they had seen before in a completely different country of thought. The dopamine signal was behaving almost exactly like a piece of mathematics that had been worked out in the study of artificial intelligence, a method called temporal difference learning, a way for any system to learn to predict rewards by hunting down the gap between what it forecast and what it actually received. It was the same rule, the same patient chase after error, that engineers would later use to let machines teach themselves to play games no human knew how to program them to win. 2 projects that could not have been further apart, evolution slowly assembling a brain across hundreds of millions of years, and a handful of mathematicians working at their desks, had arrived at the very same answer to the very same hard problem. How does anything learn to predict a world that will not hold still? Both landed on the same teacher. Use your own mistakes. So step back, and the role of this molecule shifts one final time. Pleasure it never was, even wanting we can now see sits downstream of something deeper. At its root, dopamine is a teacher, the signal that decides, error by error, what a brain will come to expect, to chase, and to overlook. The wanting we met earlier is itself something this signal taught. You reach for what it has trained you, over 10,000 small corrections. To predict is worth reaching for. Across a whole life, dopamine is quietly writing and rewriting the map of your desires, never by command, only ever by correction. Which means the truest description of you, lying here, may be one you've never thought to apply to yourself. You are a prediction machine. Every waking moment, some part of you is guessing what comes next, the next word in this sentence, the weight of the cup before you lift it, the face of the person about to speak, and checking each guess against what actually arrives, and silently fixing itself when it's wrong. 1,000 times a day. 10,000. Almost none of it ever reaching the surface where you might catch it happening. The person you are tonight, everything you've grown good at, everything that bores you now, everything you can't quite stop reaching for, is the slow accumulation of all those corrections laid down by a teacher you have never met, in a language you have never heard, on your behalf and without your consent. There is a quiet paradox in that, and it makes a soft place to come to rest. You have been shaped, more than by almost anything else in your life, by a teacher you cannot feel and were never introduced to, taught what to love and what to chase by a signal that has never once announced itself to your awareness. And now, as you let the day go and stop trying to learn a single thing, the teaching does not stop. Sleep is one of the hours the brain does its deepest sorting, choosing in the dark which of today's small errors were worth keeping. You are slipping out of the room now, into sleep. The lesson will go on without you. And there is one more thing to hold before sleep takes you. Just how physical all of this is. A teacher that writes the map of a human life, a signal running the same deep mathematics as a learning machine, and it is made of tissue, living cells in one small place, firing real pulses of a real chemical. And there are astonishingly few of them, a tiny population buried near the base of the brain, carrying all of this for the whole vast rest of you. It may be almost the smallest part of the story. Somehow, it holds up all the others. Take a single one of these cells and follow it. The body of the neuron is microscopic, a speck almost too small to see. But its axon, the long output fiber it sends out into the rest of the brain, does not stay small, teased out into one straight strand. In a rat, that single fiber would run to about 1/2 meter, and that figure is measured, traced cell by cell under a microscope. Scaled up to the far larger human brain, the best estimate puts one such strand at something near 4.5 meters, longer than the body it lives inside, longer than a car. And along its vast branching length, a single cell may form on the order of 1 to 2 million connections with its neighbors. One cell, a tree of living filament meters long, threaded invisibly through the dark, in touch with 1 million others at once. That reach is the secret of the whole arrangement. A cell that touches 1 million others can change the weather over a huge stretch of brain in a single pulse. Now here is the part that should stop you. There are only about 500,000 of these cells in the entire human brain. Set that against the 86 billion neurons the brain contains in total, and the dopamine cells come to roughly 1 in every 170,000, 6/10,000ths of a single percent. A rounding error, a small town in a vast nation. The brain pours billions of cells into seeing, into moving the fingers, into the grain of a single sound, and devotes this mere 500,000 to deciding what is worth doing at all. That small constituency is running the wanting that drives a person all day, the teacher that shapes what anyone comes to love, the entire economy of pursuit and learning we have spent all this time inside. It is almost too lopsided to believe. The smallest population in the brain, governing some of the largest things about a life. What lets so few cells carry so much is where they send those long fibers. From their cluster near the base of the brain, the threads fan out to just a few major destinations. And this is the quietly astonishing thing. The very same molecule means something completely different depending on which door it arrives at. Sent down into the deep reward hub, dopamine becomes wanting, the pull toward things. Carried up to the prefrontal cortex, the sheet of tissue right behind the forehead, it becomes focus. The holding of a thought, the keeping of a phone number in mind long enough to dial it, a plan held steady against distraction. Delivered across to the striatum, the brain's movement and habit machinery, it becomes something closer to permission to move, the green light that turns the intention to stand into the act of standing. A few threads even reach down to govern the release of a hormone, so the meaning of a dopamine pulse is set entirely by its destination, by which part of the structure the same plain knock arrives at. The chemical itself says nothing in particular, the address says everything, and the system is subtler even than that. At a single destination, the very same pulse can be read in 2 opposite directions. One set of cells is wired to take it as go, do this, move toward this, while another set, right alongside, takes the identical signal as a flat no, hold back, not yet. So dopamine is less a push than a thumb on a scale. It leans on the balance between going and stopping, and tips it one way or the other moment by moment. Let the dopamine fall too low, and the no side wins by default. Let it run too high and go floods through everything. The whole delicate poise of acting at all depends on holding that balance somewhere in the middle. And these cells are factories as much as they are broadcasters. Each one builds its own dopamine from scratch, beginning with an ordinary building block pulled from the food you eat, an amino acid called tyrosine, which it converts first into a substance called L-dopa, and then, with one more small chemical step, into dopamine itself. It is a humble supply chain for something that runs a life, the molecule of your every wanting, assembled a few atoms at a time out of yesterday's meals. We owe the discovery of all this to a Swedish scientist named Arvid Carlsson, who in the 1950s showed that dopamine, long dismissed as a mere stepping stone on the way to making other chemicals, was in fact a messenger in its own right. He gave animals a drug that stripped their brains of it and watched them go rigid and still. Then he gave them L-dopa, that same intermediate the cells use to build their dopamine, and within minutes watched them come back to life, moving and alert again as though a switch had been thrown. It was the first clear proof that a single small molecule could govern something as large as the will to move, and it would eventually win him a Nobel Prize. But there is a name the usual telling tends to leave out. A year or so before Carlsson's most cited paper, a researcher in England named Kathleen Montague became, by most accounts, the first person to find dopamine in the brain at all, to detect it in real brain tissue, including a human brain. And she published it months ahead of the work the textbooks remember. Her name has all but dropped out of the story since. Let it be said plainly, at least here in the dark, a good part of what we know about the chemistry of desire itself was first glimpsed by a woman almost no one can name. So gather all of it up, and let it land where it belongs, which is on you. Everything this story has circled, the wanting that ran you ragged today, the teacher that quietly built your tastes over a lifetime, the pull and the learning, and the ordinary moving you will do tomorrow without a single thought. All of it is being carried this very moment by something like 500,000 cells working in the dark near the base of your skull. Fewer cells than there are people in a modest town running the whole vast country of what you want and who you have slowly become. 500,000 points of light, except there is no light. They work, like everything in there, in total darkness, and have produced every wanting you have ever felt without once being seen. You could begin to lose them, a few at a time, and lose pieces of yourself in the same motion, and never once feel the cells themselves go. That is the strange awe of it. So much of a life resting on so little, and none of it ever stepping into view. They are at it right now, those few cells, ticking away in the dark behind everything you are aware of, and they are beginning, like the rest of you, to slow. The wanting they carry has gone soft and far away. Whatever pull they were generating an hour ago toward the screen or the thought or the small unfinished thing, they are letting it go quiet now, loosening their grip in time with you, settling toward the same stillness you are sinking into. It is a beautiful arrangement and a precarious one. When so much rests on so few, the loss of even a fraction of them stops being a small thing. And there is one group among these cells, the ones that carry the permission to move, whose slow disappearance does something terrible and unmistakable, something you could watch happen to a person from across a room. When they begin to die, a body that has moved freely for 50 years can find itself, gesture by gesture, going still. There was a man who had gone completely still and stayed that way for years. He sat where he was placed. If someone lifted his arm and let go, it stayed in the air where they left it, held in a strange, patient suspension until someone thought to lower it again. His face did not move, and he did not speak. For long stretches, he seemed less like a person than like a photograph of one, a statue that had been carried into a hospital ward and set in a chair by a window, and then, for the most part, forgotten. By then, he had been there a very long time, and here is the part that makes the stillness almost unbearable to think about. Behind the motionless face, a sharp and lucid mind was wide awake the entire time, watching the seasons turn past the window, fully aware of the body it could no longer persuade to move. His name, in the account we have of him, is Leonard L. What had happened to him began decades earlier, when he was young. A strange illness had swept the world in the years after the First World War, a kind of sleeping sickness that, at its height, put its victims into long, deep states of torpor, and left a great many of the survivors like this, locked over the following years into a frozen, statue-like stillness. Hundreds of thousands were affected, and then, almost as mysteriously as it had come, the epidemic faded, leaving its survivors scattered through the chronic wards of the world, parked and waiting for 30 and 40 years. The illness had reached deep into Leonard's brain and quietly destroyed the very cells we have just been tracing. That small population, near the base of the brain, that carries the permission to move. With those cells gone, the circuit that turns an intention into an action simply had no current running through it. He could still form the wish to lift his arm. The wish could not get out. The bridge between deciding to move and moving had been taken down, and he was stranded on the near side of it, intact and aware, for the better part of his life. This is the same chemistry that fails, more slowly and far more often, in Parkinson's disease. There, the movement-carrying dopamine cells do not vanish in an epidemic. They fade out gradually, over years. And the disease is so patient, so quiet, that by the time the first tremor or the first stiffness appears, something like 4/5 of the dopamine in the movement system is already gone. The brain compensates for the loss, covering for it, until one day it can cover no longer. Exactly how much has to be lost before the trouble shows, and why these particular cells are the ones singled out to die, we still argue about. But the through line is plain enough. When the dopamine goes, the movement goes with it. And then, for Leonard L. and others like him, something close to a miracle arrived, though it would not behave like one. In the summer of 1969, a young doctor named Oliver Sacks, who would later write their story down, began giving these long-frozen patients L-Dopa, the raw material the brain turns into dopamine, the same substance that had once brought Carlson's rigid animals back to life. The patients woke. Up and down a ward of people who had been still for decades, life came flooding back in, a scene Sacks could only describe in the language of resurrection. Leonard L., who had not moved or spoken on his own in years, stood up and walked and spoke and asked for a typewriter so that he could begin to write. Pages poured out of him, the dammed-up words of a mind that had been sealed for 30 years. He had been frozen since he was a young man. He woke now into a middle-aged body and a world that had quietly rebuilt itself without him, and still he met it with astonishment and gratitude rather than grief. He read again. He read the Paradiso, the part of Dante's poem set in heaven, with tears running down a face that had not changed its expression in a decade. In his diary, he wrote that he felt saved, resurrected, reborn. Then he wrote a single sentence that holds, in a handful of words, almost everything this story has been trying to say. "I have been hungry and yearning all my life," he wrote, "and now I am full." The words he chose are worth dwelling on. Hungry, yearning, full. A man describing what it was like to move again, to stand and walk and reach into the world, reaches instinctively for the language of wanting, of hunger, of yearning, of being filled. That is not a slip or a flourish. It is the deepest thing the case has to teach. Movement and desire turn out to be a single act, carried by a single chemical, and the wanting is only its inward half, the part that happens before the body moves. To want something is already to begin moving toward it. Desire is a motion that has not yet reached the limbs. The step is the same impulse, arriving. What froze in those patients was that whole arc, from the first inward lean to the final outward stride, and when the dopamine flowed back in, the wish and the step came back together, because down in the brain they had always been one thing. We like to imagine a clean line between the self that wants and the body that acts. Leonard L., for a few months, was living proof that the line was never quite there. But the miracle would not behave like one. The awakenings turned unstable, and then they turned cruel. The same dose that set a patient free one week could, the next, tip them into a frantic, driven overload, tics, compulsions, storms of movement and feeling as impossible to contain as the stillness had once been impossible to break. The fine balance a healthy brain keeps without any effort at all could not be counterfeited from the outside simply by pouring the chemical back in. The system overshot, then undershot, surged and stalled and surged again. Many of the patients, Leonard among them, could not hold the awakened state and slipped by degrees back toward the stillness they had come from. Some of them knew it was happening even as it happened, felt the world drawing away again, the movements thickening, the door swinging slowly shut, and could do nothing to hold it open. And here is the honest, uncomfortable part, the part the field has never fully resolved. We knew exactly which molecule was missing. We knew how to put it back, and we still could not reliably give these people their lives again. Restoring a chemical, it turns out, is a far smaller thing than restoring a person. We could refill what was missing. We could not rebuild, from the outside, the delicate work the living brain does with it. That gap between the molecule and the life is still open today. You will almost certainly never know Leonard L's version of this, the total freeze and the sealed years. But the unity he revealed by losing it is running in you, quietly, every hour you are awake. Think of the last time you wanted something and discovered, half a second later, that you were already moving toward it, your hand already reaching, your weight already shifting, the body underway before any decision had announced itself. That seamlessness, the way the wanting pours straight into the doing with no visible join, is the very thing Leonard L. lost and briefly, achingly, got back. The hinge between your wishing and your moving is made of dopamine, and you swing through it 10,000 times a day without once feeling it turn. It runs so smoothly that you have never had to notice it, which is its own quiet mercy, and a measure of how much has to be working, in the dark, for an ordinary morning to feel like nothing at all. And tonight, that same hinge is easing shut, gently, in the right direction. As you sink towards sleep, the dopamine that turns your wanting into moving is going quiet along with everything else, so that the urge to get up and the power to get up are fading together, in step, the way they always do at this hour. This is the kind of stillness Leonard L. was robbed of, the soft, temporary kind that a body chooses for itself, the freezing you are allowed to come back from in the morning, nothing at all like the trap he was sealed inside for years. The wish to move and the means to move are lying down together now, side by side, and going quiet. There is nowhere you have to be, nothing you have to reach for, and the hinge can stay closed until light. Leonard L's freezing was the extreme of it, a whole life sealed away by a near-total loss. But the same machinery can fail in smaller, quieter ways that never look anything like illness. There are mornings, and you know the kind, when you are not frozen and not sick, when nothing whatsoever is wrong with your body, and still you cannot make yourself begin. The wanting itself will not start. If dopamine is the chemical that carries a wish across into an act, then what exactly is happening on the days the wish never even arrives? What is happening on those mornings is gentler than the names you give it. The thing in front of you is small. Answer the message, stand up and start the shower. Open the document you have been circling for a week. You know it is small. You know, with complete certainty, that 2 minutes after you begin, you will feel fine, even glad that you did. And still, you cannot cross the short distance between not doing it and doing it. It isn't that the task is hard. The task is easy, laughably easy, and somehow too heavy to lift. There is no pain in it, no real unhappiness even, just a strange and total unwillingness to spend whatever it would take to begin. So the hours go by. You watch yourself not doing it, narrate your own stalling, promise to start at the next round number on the clock, and let that number slide past too. And then, because we are hard on ourselves, you reach for the oldest word in the drawer, lazy. You decide one more time that the problem is simply you. For a long time, the explanation on offer was a mood, You don't do the thing because you are down, because nothing feels worth wanting, because the pleasure has drained out of the world. That is the simple, familiar story. Low dopamine, low mood, low happiness, every one of them the same dial turned down. But the science of the last 20 years tells a more precise story, and a far kinder one. On those flat mornings, the thing that has gone quiet is the effort system, the willingness to spend yourself on anything at all. Your capacity for pleasure may be perfectly intact. What is missing is the drive to get up and use it. The flat morning is a famine of drive. The cupboard of pleasure is still stocked. You simply cannot make yourself cross the room to it. The experiment that settled this is almost too neat. John Salamone and his colleagues offered rats a simple choice. On one side, a lever, press it many times over, and you earn a pellet of something delicious. On the other side, a bowl of plain, ordinary chow, free for the taking, no work required at all. Given that choice, a normal rat will gladly work the lever, paying in effort for the better food. Then the researchers lowered the dopamine in the rat's reward hub, and the behavior split cleanly in two. The rats stopped working the lever. They wandered over and ate the free chow instead. But here is what did not change. They ate just as much food as before, so they were no less hungry. And when the two foods were simply set side by side, with no work required of either, they still went straight for the delicious one, so they liked it exactly as much as ever. Their hunger was intact, their pleasure was intact, their preference unchanged. The only thing dopamine had taken was their willingness to pay the price. It is the cleanest demonstration in the field that dopamine is not in the business of pleasure or even of appetite. It is in the business of effort, of how much a creature will do to get a thing it already wants and already likes. To see why this should be, it helps to notice what every action really is. A small bargain struck across time. The cost, the effort, the minutes, the energy it will burn is paid now, up front, in the present. The reward, whatever it is, arrives later, sometimes much later, and some part of the brain is forever running the arithmetic on that bargain. Is the payoff over there in the future worth the cost right here in the now? Dopamine is what presses down on the future side of that scale. When it is flowing well, even a modest or distant reward feels worth the effort to reach. The future pulls hard enough to lift you out of the chair. It even sets the pace. When the dial is high, the world feels worth moving through quickly because there is so much worth getting to. When it runs low, the scale tips the other way. The cost now swells up huge and immediate, while the reward later thins out and drifts off until it is barely visible, and almost nothing you could do clears the bar. Nothing about the task has changed. The exchange rate between effort and reward has. The closest the body comes to letting you feel this directly is deep illness or deep exhaustion. The days with a high fever, or after a night with no sleep, when lifting a glass of water seems to cost as much as lifting a stone, and you put it off and put it off, although you are thirsty. The flat morning is a quieter cousin of that. The heaviness is real. You can feel it as a kind of soft gravity holding you in place, but it does not live in your arms. Your muscles are fine. They would obey an order the instant one came. What has gone heavy is one step upstream of the muscles, in the system that decides whether to issue the order at all, whether the thing is worth spending a body on. Anyone who has surfaced from a long illness knows the strange triumph of the first small effort that finally feels possible again. The first walk to the window, and knows too that the legs were always able. It was the willingness that had to recover. The legs can move. The accountant who signs off on moving them has gone quiet. This is exactly where the old low dopamine equals sadness story does its quiet damage. Ask people living through a real depression what it is like, and many will tell you something that surprises the textbook. The pleasure is often still there. A good meal still tastes good. A joke still lands. A familiar face still lifts something in the chest. What fails is the capacity to begin. The getting up, the reaching, the starting of anything has thickened into something nearly impossible, and the clinical word for that, energia, is so much gentler and truer than the words people turn on themselves. Because once you see that the effort and the enjoyment run on separate systems, the whole moral weather of a flat morning changes. Think of the person, and maybe it has been you, who lets the dishes pile up and the calls go unreturned, feeling the guilt of it like a low fever, certain it is a flaw in their character. Those dishes are not hard, and neither are the calls. What is hard, what has become almost impossible, is the act of beginning at all. And beginning is the one thing this signal pays for. It was never laziness and never weakness of will, never proof that you didn't care enough or want it enough. It was something much smaller and much more forgivable, a single system, the one that quietly prices your effort, running low. And like the tide, that kind of low comes back in. You were not failing to try. The signal that makes trying feel possible had simply ebbed and would, given a little time, return. All over the world, right now, that same system is easing off, not from defeat, but on schedule. In 100 countries, in the dark, people are lying down and finding, one by one, that the day's last calculation has come back the same for all of them. Nothing more is worth the cost tonight. The effort that drove them since morning is being allowed to go slack. The accountants are closing their books. This is the low that is supposed to come. The gentle, nightly ebb the whole machinery was built to take. Nothing at all like the ambush of a flat morning, the one low that asks nothing of you and forgives everything. Everything in the end rests on that one quiet dial. If dopamine sets the price of effort, if it decides all day long what is worth getting up for and what is not, then anything that could reach in and turn that dial would hold a strange and enormous power over you. It could make a trivial thing feel worth hours of your life, or make a thing that truly matters feel like far too much to attempt. And it would not need to be an illness or a drug to do it. There is an entire industry wide awake right now while you are not, that has learned to reach into exactly this system, the wanting, the effort, the price of getting up, and to set the dial for its own ends, and not for yours. You have felt it, probably within the last few hours. Your hand begins to move toward your phone before you have decided anything, before there is a buzz, a chime, a single reason to reach for it. There is nothing waiting. No one has messaged you. Nothing has happened. And still the hand goes, and the thumb finds the familiar shape, and some small specific hunger in you leans toward the screen to see. It is genuinely strange when you stop on it. You are reaching for a reward that isn't there, that may not be there, that you cannot even name the shape of. The wanting has arrived ahead of anything to want. The reach has come before the reason. That pull is not a flaw in your character, and it is not an accident. It is the product of a design, and the design is old, far older than the phone. Almost a century ago, studying how rewards shape behavior, B.F. Skinner found something that ought to have been taken as a warning. The way to make an animal press a lever most relentlessly is not to reward it every time. An animal that gets a pellet for every press will press calmly and stop when it has had enough. The animal that cannot be stopped is the one rewarded unpredictably. Sometimes a pellet, sometimes nothing. No way to know which press will pay. That uncertainty produces a pressing that runs on long past hunger, past sense, past satisfaction. The slot machine is built on this exact principle, and it is the most profitable machine ever placed in a room. And the feed in your hand was modelled on it, deliberately and explicitly. The bright red badge announcing that something is waiting, the feed that never ends, so there is no natural place to stop. The little resistance as you pull the screen down, the half second of spin before it loads. None of these are careless choices. They are the slot machine's oldest tricks, refined and handed to a few billion people at once. And the reason uncertainty works so well runs straight back through everything we have followed. The dopamine signal, you'll remember, fires for the unpredicted, and a reward you can fully predict eventually stops firing it at all. The signal goes quiet, the surprise migrates to the cue, the lesson is learned. But an uncertain reward can never be predicted away. There is no learning your way out of a slot machine, because the entire point of it is that the next outcome cannot be known. So the prediction error never resolves, the surprise never goes silent. Every pull is, to the dopamine system, genuinely uncertain, and so the wanting it generates never switches off, no matter how many times you pull. Uncertainty is the one condition that keeps the signal maximally, permanently alive. What these machines sell in the end is the prediction error itself, a surprise engineered never to settle. This is also why the popular phrase gets it exactly backwards. People talk about the dopamine hit the phone gives you, as though each glance delivers a small squirt of pleasure. But the dopamine lives in the looking. The peak comes in the half second of pulling down to refresh, in the blank moment before the screen resolves. The same moment Schultz's neurons fired for the cue and not the juice. By the time you actually see what loaded, the dopamine has mostly done its work. And what you find is, almost always, a small letdown, a half-interesting post, a message that didn't need a reply, nothing much. That faint disappointment is not a failure of the design. It is the design. The phone was never built to satisfy you because satisfaction would end the loop. It was built to keep you wanting, and wanting, as we have seen, is a different thing entirely from liking. It is why a scroll can feel, from the inside, like the most compelling thing in the world and a faint waste of your life at the very same time. The wanting fully engaged, the liking never quite arriving. You are holding a small machine for manufacturing wanting and almost never delivering the having. The rat at its lever, the man at his button. They are in your hand now, and they are you. And this is the part worth letting land, even now, in the dark. None of it is loose metaphor. You're wanting, this specific ancient system we have spent the whole of this story inside, the one that got your ancestors up off the ground and out to hunt, has been studied, measured, tested against millions of people at once, and engineered around by some of the most capable minds of your lifetime, backed by more money than most governments command. The blank pause before the screen loads was tuned. The unpredictable trickle of rewards was calibrated to hold you. Your attention is the product being sold, and your wanting is the lever they reach in and pull to deliver it. So the next time the hand drifts toward the phone with nothing waiting, be a little gentler with yourself than weak. You are not weak. You are the target of one of the largest, most precise efforts in history to make a person feel exactly that pull. We should be fair about this, because the easy version, shadowy engineers twirling their mustaches, is both wrong and too comforting. Most of the people who built these systems did not set out to harm anyone. They were simply rewarded themselves for holding attention. And because uncertainty holds attention better than anything else does, the machines drifted, almost on their own, toward the design that works on us best. No villain was required. The incentive did the work. But that, if anything, is the more sobering thought. For the first time in the long history of this system, the wanting that evolved to keep a creature alive, to send it out looking for food, for warmth, for others, has been turned into a resource, mined at industrial scale, by an economy that profits in exact proportion to how completely you cannot put the thing down. We have built a business model out of the oldest hunger in the brain, but not now. Right now the phone is somewhere out of reach, or it should be, and the loop has finally gone quiet. No cue is pulling at you. Nothing is refreshing. The lever sits unpulled. So here is a question. In the dark, where no one is selling anything, all those times you reached today, all those small checks, what was it you were actually hoping to find? And feel, if you can, how it is to want nothing in particular right now. To lie here with no next thing to pull toward, the hunger itself going slack. That ease you're sinking into, the not reaching, the nothing left to check. Is it possible that this, and not whatever was ever on the screen, was the thing you were hungry for all along? The phone, for all of that, is the gentle version. It is a hijacking with limits, legal, designed to keep you coming back rather than to ruin you, a lever you can, on a good day, still choose to set down. But the principle underneath it has no such limits of its own. The same machinery, an uncertain reward, a prediction error that will not resolve, a wanting that outruns any liking, can be pushed far harder than a feed ever pushes it, until the wanting stops being a pull you can resist and becomes the thing that runs the life. There is a version of this that does not let you set the lever down at all. To understand the version that will not let go, begin with the thing a natural reward does, because the difference between them is the whole story. A good meal, a kind word, a problem solved, each sends up a small flare of dopamine, a brief rise that means better than expected, worth noting, worth learning. And then, as the brain comes to expect it, the flare fades. The 10th good meal lights almost nothing. The familiar kindness, lovely as it is, no longer surprises. That fading is not a loss. It is the system working exactly as it should, learning the reward, settling its value, and falling quiet because there is nothing left to learn. A drug does something no meal or kindness can. It reaches past the entire apparatus of expectation and pours dopamine straight into the reward hub, a flood far larger than anything the world can produce by ordinary means. But the size of the flood is not the real danger. The danger is that this flare never fades. It arrives again at full strength every single time, no matter how completely the brain has learned to expect it. It is the one signal in the whole system that refuses to resolve. The strangest fact about the drugs that capture people is how little they have in common. Cocaine, alcohol, nicotine, heroin, amphetamine. Chemically, they are a motley crowd, molecules of utterly different shapes doing utterly different things to the body. One blocks the tiny pumps that would normally clear dopamine away, so it pulls and rises. Another quietly lifts the brake that holds the dopamine cells in check and lets them fire freely. A third forces the cells to dump their dopamine out directly. Different routes entirely. And yet, in 1988, two researchers, Gaetano Di Chiara and Assunta Imperato, showed that every one of them ends in the same place. Each drives dopamine up in the nucleus accumbens, the small reward hub we keep returning to, far beyond anything food or warmth or company can manage. The drugs people don't get hooked on don't do this. The ones that take people over, every last one of them, converge on flooding that single spot. It was the discovery of addiction's final common pathway, many different doors, all opening into the same room. But the flood itself is not quite the heart of it. To find the heart, you have to put two things together, and it took someone thinking in the language of computation to do it. Remember what the dopamine flare actually means. Better than predicted, value this more, learn. And remember that, in a healthy system, learning ends. Once you can predict a reward, the error shrinks to zero, the flare goes silent, and the brain stops updating, because its model of the world is finally correct. Now, look again at the drug. Its flood of dopamine is not produced because the world exceeded your expectations. It is produced by direct chemical force. The drug manufactures the better-than-expected signal itself, by hand, bypassing prediction entirely. So no matter how perfectly the brain learns to anticipate the drug, the signal still announces every single time that the drug was better than expected. The error has no way to close. In 2004, the researcher A. David Reddish gave this its exact name, a non-compensable prediction error, an error the brain has no means to cancel out. And the consequence is merciless. If a system is told, every time without exception, that something exceeded its already high expectations, then the value it assigns to that thing cannot do anything but climb. past every natural reward, past any ceiling, without end. The learning machine that should have finished its work long ago is forced, with each dose, to conclude that the drug is better still than the impossible value it had already given it. This is where a mechanism turns into a tragedy. Every genuine good in a life, a meal, a warm bed, the face of someone you love, has a value the brain eventually learns and holds at some settled, finite level because its errors are allowed to resolve. The drug's value alone has no ceiling. It rises and keeps rising. So in every silent comparison the brain runs, the drug against food, the drug against family, the drug against safety, against tomorrow. The drug's figure comes out higher and climbing while everything else holds still. This is the part it is vital to understand, because it is so easily mistaken for something uglier. The person trapped this way has not decided they love the drug more than their child. A calculation running far beneath anything we would call deciding has been chemically rigged to value the drug above all finite things, without limit, and the wanting simply follows the number. Call it weakness of will, and you have misread the machine entirely. What has been corrupted is the arithmetic running underneath the will, at a level no act of will can reach. You have already met the gentler shapes of this. The slot machine, the endless feed, they too hold a prediction error open and will not let it close. But they do it by keeping the reward genuinely uncertain, and uncertainty in the end can be seen through. A person can learn that the machine is a losing game and walk away from it, even when walking away is hard. The drug doesn't trouble with uncertainty at all. It reaches past prediction entirely and forces the error by chemistry, so there is nothing to see through, nothing to learn your way out of. The signal lies directly to the rest of the brain, in a language the brain has no way to doubt. The feed was the gentle version because, on a good day, you can still set it down. The drug goes underneath that. It rewrites the value of setting it down. And here is the thing that should give you a quiet, sober chill, lying here in the dark. None of this required a broken brain. It is your machine, the same flawless learning system that taught you to walk, to read, to love the people you love, the one we have spent this whole story admiring, doing precisely what it was built to do, with perfect fidelity, in answer to a signal that happens to be a chemical lie. The line between you and the person it has captured is not, at bottom, a line of character, or strength, or how badly anyone wanted to keep their life. It is closer to a chemical accident, what a person was exposed to, and when, and how their particular system happened to answer. The dread in this is structural, not moral. The machinery is this good, this faithful, this tireless, and something so faithful can be turned by the right molecule against the very life it spends every moment trying to protect. But your errors, tonight, are allowed to close. And that is the mercy the captured brain is denied. As you sleep, the learning machine will do the opposite of what the drug forces on it. It will let the day settle. The small wantings of today, the things you reached for, the pulls you felt and the ones you gave into, will lose their charge, get weighed and filed and quietly discounted, so that by morning they hold less grip on you than they did at noon. Your flares are rising and fading the way they are meant to, one last time before sleep and then going dark. Tomorrow you will want some things and not others, and the wanting will have been retuned overnight by a system that, in you, still knows how to finish a lesson and let it go. That is not a small gift. It is the whole difference between a life and a trap. We have been looking at all of this from the outside, the corrupted arithmetic, the value climbing past every ceiling, the figure on the page. But an equation is a cold thing, and a trapped person is not living inside an equation. They are living inside an experience. So the question the mechanism cannot answer on its own is the one that remains. What does it actually feel like, from the inside, to be run by a wanting that has outgrown everything you once cared about? And in the cruelest turn of all, has outgrown even the drug itself, so that the craving goes on long after the pleasure is gone. A man sits at a slot machine at 3 in the morning, and he is not having a good time. He has been there for hours. Most of the money he came with is gone, and a good deal more besides. His jaw is tight, his eyes are flat and tired, and there is nothing on his face that anyone would mistake for fun. And still his hand goes out, again and again, and presses the button. The same reach we have followed from the very beginning. The rat's lever, the man's button, the glowing machine. Only now it is a real person in real trouble, and he cannot make himself stand up and walk away. Here is the strangest part. Until about a year ago, this man had never gambled in his life. He was careful with money to the point of dullness, the sort who balanced his accounts to the last cent. Something changed him, and not in any of the ways a story like this usually goes. It was a pill. About a year before that night, he had been diagnosed with Parkinson's disease, the same slow loss of the movement dopamine cells we sat with earlier, the ones that carry the permission to move. And he had been given a drug to make up for what was fading. Not L-Dopa this time, but a different kind of medicine, a dopamine agonist. A molecule that doesn't get turned into dopamine but simply imitates it, switching on dopamine's receptors directly, all over the brain. For his movement it worked. The stiffness eased and he moved more like himself again. But a drug taken as a pill has no way of confining itself to the movement circuits. It washes through the whole system, the wanting included. And in a fraction of the people who take these drugs, about 1 in 7 by one large study, it switches on something that was never there before. A compulsion. For this man, gambling. For others, compulsive shopping or eating or sex. A pure manufactured wanting conjured out of nothing by a pill meant only to help them walk. And here is the bind that makes it so cruel. The drug dismantling his life is also the one letting him stand and move. To stop the gambling, he may have to give back the walking, to choose, in effect, between his legs and his savings, his mobility and his marriage. This is the cleanest experiment chance ever ran on the difference between wanting and liking, and it quietly demolishes the usual story we tell about addiction. That story says people chase these things for the pleasure, for the high, and that stopping is, in the end, a question of willpower. But ask these patients what the gambling is actually like, and a great many of them will tell you they do not enjoy it. They describe a compulsion, a need, something they are driven to do and feel wretched while doing, with little or no pleasure anywhere in it. What the pill handed them was a new hunger, with no joy attached to it. And the proof that it is the drug and not the person is as clean as proof ever gets. Lower the dose, and the gambling very often stops as abruptly as it began. These were careful, ordinary people. The wanting turned up in them by a molecule, the capacity for pleasure left sitting exactly where it had always been. Weakness had nothing to do with it. The cost of it was not abstract. One man, Gary Charbonneau is the name in the court records, gambled away so much on one of these drugs that a jury eventually held the maker responsible and awarded him millions. Another, a man named Wayne Canuch, a steady company employee for decades, lost something on the order of $350,000, along with his marriage and his home, before anyone thought to connect the wreckage to the medicine that was keeping him on his feet. These were not gamblers or thrill seekers or people looking for an escape. They were people handed a reasonable treatment for a hard disease, who found themselves, with no warning, unable to stop reaching for something that was quietly dismantling their lives. That is the thing to hold. What ruined them was a wanting with all the joy carved out of it, a hunger that had come loose from any pleasure and gone on growing by itself. What the pill did to these patients in a matter of weeks, ordinary addiction does to people slowly across years, and the underlying shape is exactly the same. It even has a name: incentive sensitization. The idea is that the two systems we have kept so carefully apart, the wanting and the liking, do not simply stay apart under repeated use. They begin to move in opposite directions. Each exposure sensitizes the wanting, makes it larger, quicker to fire, more easily set off by the smallest reminder. And each exposure does the reverse to the liking. The pleasure dulls, tolerance creeps in, the same dose delivering less and less of what it once did. Draw it as two lines across time, and you have the whole tragedy in a single picture. One line climbing, the other sinking, the space between them opening into a gulf. And because the wanting has been sensitized, it no longer waits for the drug itself. A cue is enough now. The sight of a casino, the jingle of a machine, a certain street, a certain hour of the night. Any reminder at all can set the whole craving roaring again, long after the person swore they were finished. At the far end of it stands someone who craves the thing more fiercely than they have ever craved anything, and enjoys it less than they ever have. The greatest possible wanting laid directly over the smallest possible liking, and the brain, trying to cope, only deepens the hole. Flooded again and again with far more dopamine than it was ever built to handle, it does the sensible thing and turns down its own sensitivity. It sheds receptors, the docking points where dopamine lands and is heard. Brain scans of people deep in addiction show exactly this. A striatum running noticeably short of those receptors, perhaps a fifth fewer than other people carry, which means that ordinary life, a good meal, a bright morning, the company of someone who loves them, now arrives at a brain with fewer places to register it and lands muted, greyed out, not worth the effort of rising for. So the gulf widens from both sides at once. The craving for the one thing is sharpened to a scream, while the entire rest of the world dims down toward nothing. In the end, the drug is the only thing left that registers at all. The last lit window in a house where every other light has gone out. It stays bright only by contrast, only because the dark has closed in around everything else. You have felt the faint shape of this yourself, in miniature. The thing you kept reaching for long after you had stopped enjoying it. The scroll or the snack or the old habit that gave you less and less and that you wanted anyway. The distance between that and the man at the slot machine is, one more time, mostly a matter of degree and of chemistry, not of character and not of worth. And this is the lesson worth carrying up out of all of it. Wanting and enjoying are so genuinely separate that they can be pried entirely apart until a person is devoured by a hunger for something that gives them nothing at all. None of it is a flaw in the soul. It is the plain architecture of an ordinary brain, driven to a terrible edge. So the next time you watch someone in the grip of something that is plainly wrecking them, and feel the easy thought rise, why don't they just stop? Hold instead the picture of that careful man at the machine in the dark, not enjoying it, unable to leave, ruined by a pill that was only ever meant to let him walk. There is a strange mercy waiting in this, though, and it is yours tonight. All day long you are a creature of wanting, reaching, pursuing, the dopamine pricing each thing and sending you after it. The man at the slot machine is simply what happens when that wanting loses its off switch. But sleep is the one place the wanting is allowed to stop completely, and not by being satisfied, not by winning, not by getting the thing at last. It stops by simply dissolving. In a few minutes you will want nothing and lack nothing, and the gap between wanting and liking that ran your whole day will quietly close, because both of them will have gone still together. The stopping place that the trapped man would give anything to find and cannot, you arrive at it every single night for free, the moment you stop trying to reach it at all. And that closing of the gap, free and nightly, points at something worth carrying into tomorrow. If the trouble was never really about pleasure, if the wanting can swell up and run a whole life on its own, with the liking shrinking the entire time, then a great deal of the advice we give ourselves about all this is aimed at the wrong place. We talk about resetting our pleasure, detoxing our dopamine, draining off some excess of enjoyment, as though the problem were that we had simply been having too good a time. But if enjoyment was never the thing driving any of it, then the cure that everyone is selling may be treating a sickness the brain does not actually have. You have almost certainly seen it, and you may even have tried it. The dopamine detox, the dopamine fast, the promise, repeated across 1 million videos and articles, that if you give up your phone and your screens and your snacks and your easy pleasures for a day or a weekend, you can reset your dopamine, drain off the excess you have built up, clear the system out, and come back able to enjoy a quiet walk or a plain meal the way you used to, before everything got so loud. It is a tidy, hopeful idea, and the question underneath it deserves a plain answer, because so many people are pouring real effort into it. Can you actually do that? Can you drain and refill the most misunderstood chemical in your brain simply by giving things up for a while? The short answer is no, and the reason why is, quietly, the most clarifying thing in this entire story. The dopamine detox rests on a picture of dopamine that the whole of the science contradicts. It imagines dopamine as a kind of fluid in a tank, a reservoir of pleasure that fills up when you indulge and drains down when you abstain, that can run over or run dry, and that a good fast might flush clean. The picture is seductive because it matches the way we already think about indulgence, that pleasures run up a kind of debt, and that going without pays it back. It is a moral intuition dressed up as neuroscience. But the brain keeps no such ledger. You cannot detox dopamine for the same reason you cannot detox electricity or take a cleanse to lower your own pulse. It is not a toxin that accumulates and not a fuel that depletes. It is a signal, a live message running through a network that never switches off. And a signal is not the kind of thing that has a drain. It helps to walk through why, because each piece on its own undoes the whole premise. Start with the simplest. Dopamine is not something you would ever sensibly want less of, the way the detox implies. You need it to move at all, to begin anything, to learn, to feel that a thing is worth doing. The people who genuinely do have low dopamine are not serene and unplugged and wonderfully present. They are the frozen patients, the ones who cannot get out of the chair. Next, giving up your phone for a day does not actually lower your dopamine. It lowers the stimulation reaching you, which is a different thing entirely. There is no fast, no abstinence that pulls the baseline signal down. And last, the most telling point of all, the ordinary things people detox from, the feed, the notifications, the snacks, produce only small, modest blips of dopamine, nothing remotely like the flood of a drug. There is no overflow to drain, no scorched receptors to regrow over a weekend, nothing there to reset. The very thing the whole ritual sets out to fix does not exist. And yet the people doing this are not fools, and the practice is not worthless, which is the part worth being careful and fair about. They have stumbled onto something real and hung the wrong name on it. The man who actually coined the term, a psychiatrist named Cameron Sieper, never meant it literally. He built the idea on a long-established tool from behavioral therapy called stimulus control, deliberately changing your surroundings to break a compulsive habit. And he has said plainly that the dopamine label was just a catchy title, never meant to suggest you were lowering any chemical at all. Neuroscientists who study the system have been blunter about the literal version, one called the notion of resetting your brain by avoiding dopamine triggers. Simply nonsense. Because what the practice really does when it works is exactly what we watch the engineered loops do, only run in reverse. Step away from the feed for a day and you are not draining a tank. You are letting the cue-triggered wanting go quiet, breaking the pull and refresh cycle, giving the overtuned loops a chance to settle. The instinct behind it is sound. People can feel correctly that something about the way they use these machines has a grip on them, and that stepping back loosens it. Only the story they have been told about why it helps, the toxin, the tank, the reset, is wrong. Even the more careful accounts carry a faint trace of the same mistake. The book that did the most to bring this molecule into everyday conversation, Dopamine Nation, frames the whole subject as a seesaw between pleasure and pain. a genuinely useful image that captures something real about tolerance, about how overindulgence can tip the balance and leave us flat. But the labels on the seesaw quietly smuggle the old error back in, because the balance was never really pleasure against pain. By everything we have followed, dopamine's two poles sit far closer to motivation and lethargy, to drive and stillness, to wanting, not to liking. Even that book's own author has granted that pinning addiction on dopamine alone is too simple. And this is the thread running underneath every one of these popular fixes. The detoxes and the resets and the balances alike, they all still treat dopamine as pleasure, the thing to drain, to balance, to earn back, when pleasure was the one thing it was never really about. You cannot detox a teaching signal. You cannot fast your way out of a system whose entire job is to make you want things and to make you learn. There is a particular relief in finally setting all of this down, in putting away a tool that was never going to work and quietly forgiving yourself for every reset that didn't reset anything. And a smaller, sheepish feeling rides along with the relief, the honest kind of embarrassment, that we took the single most misunderstood word in the brain and, handed the chance, misunderstood it one more time, and built rituals and bestsellers and weekend cleanses on top of a meaning we never had right in the first place. But here is the part that turns the whole thing gently on its head. There is a real reset, a genuine nightly recalibration of this entire system, and it is the plainest thing imaginable, and you are already doing it. It is sleep. As you lie here and let go, the system does, on its own, the very thing the detox only promised. It lets the day's wanting settle, lets the overfired loops fall quiet, lets the small unresolved errors of the day finish resolving, and tunes itself back toward its baseline before morning. You do not have to drain anything. You do not have to give anything up. You only have to stop, which you are already doing, and let the night carry out the one reset that was ever actually real. Clearing all that away leaves a cleaner view of things, but a more humbling one too. Because if the popular picture of dopamine could be this wrong, in this many directions at once, it is only fair to turn the same skeptical eye on the picture we have spent all this time building. We have followed a clean and satisfying story, the wanting, the prediction error, the teacher that shapes a whole life, and most of it holds up. But the scientists who built that story are the first to admit it is neither finished nor as tidy as an hour like this can make it sound. So the honest question to carry from here, once the myths have been swept off the table, is the quietest and the hardest of them all. How much of this do we really know? And where exactly does the solid ground give out? It gives out, as it happens, in a place not far from where we started, in a laboratory with a monkey and a single dopamine neuron under an electrode. By the clean story, the one we have been following all along, that neuron's behavior is easy to predict. Show the monkey a cue that means a reward is coming and the cell should flare. Show it a cue that means something unpleasant is coming, a small puff of air to the eye, harmless but disliked, and the cell should do the opposite. Dip, fall quiet, register the bad news as a downward notch. Better than expected, up. Worse than expected, down. For a great many of the neurons recorded, that is exactly what happened, and the clean story held beautifully. But for a sizable share of them, the trace did something it was not supposed to be capable of. It flared for the bad cue too. The neuron lit up for the threat exactly as it lit up for the reward. Bright for the good thing and bright for the dreaded thing, with no difference between them at all. By the reward prediction error story, that should have been impossible. And there it was, on the chart, in front of people who had expected something cleaner. It was not a fluke or a faulty electrode. When the researchers, Matsumoto and Hikosaka, were the ones who pinned it down, sorted the recordings out, the dopamine neurons turned out to come in at least two kinds, and the two kinds even tended to sit in slightly different parts of the midbrain. One kind behaved precisely as the clean story demanded, flaring for the better than expected, dipping for the worse, the value and prediction signal we have spent this whole story with. But the other kind, and there were a great many of them, did not seem to care in the slightest whether the news was good or bad. They flared for anything that mattered, anything sudden, anything intense, anything that seized attention, a windfall or a threat. It made no difference to them. What they tracked was salience, the sheer importance of a thing, the quality of demanding attention right now, whether it turned out to be wonderful or terrible. And this is the quietly destabilizing part if you let it land, lying here with that same machinery ticking inside your own skull, the signal running you this very moment, the one we have spent all this time mapping and naming and explaining, is not the single clean thing the story made it out to be. It is at least two things, and probably more, overlapping and tangled, some of it tracking what you want, and some of it tracking only what is loud. The tidy account is partly true and enormously useful and unfinished. There is genuinely no complete theory of the thing that is running you. And this is not, in the end, a cause for unease. There is, if anything, a strange comfort in it. You are not a solved equation. The most intimate machinery you have still holds real mystery in it. Not the cheap mystery of something no one has bothered to examine, but the deep kind. The kind that is still standing after the most careful people alive have looked as hard as they possibly can. It goes deeper than two types, besides. The more finely the system is mapped, the less it looks like one system at all. Dopamine neurons, sorted by where they draw their input and where they send it, turn out to do nearly opposite jobs. One small circuit pulling a creature toward a reward, another sitting right beside it, driving it away from a threat. What we have been calling the dopamine system, as though it were a single thing, is closer to a loose federation of smaller systems, overlapping and only partly in agreement. And beneath all of it lies a puzzle older and stranger than any of these, one we have brushed up against again and again without ever quite naming it. This one chemical is the signal of wanting and learning, and it is also, in the very same brain, the signal that lets a body move. Lose it, and a person freezes where they stand. How can a single molecule mean both this is worth learning and move now? How does a cell, receiving a pulse of it, know which of those it is being told? Nobody is sure. One researcher who has spent his life on the question gave a paper the plain, almost helpless title, "What does dopamine mean?" And the honest answer, after all the decades and all the elegant experiments, is that we still do not entirely know. This honest edge is the channel's home ground, and it is worth being clear about what kind of not knowing it is, because it is so easily mistaken for failure, and it is the opposite of failure. It is not that the science is weak or that the story we have followed is wrong. The story is strong, and most of it will stand for a long time yet. It is that we have done, superbly, the thing science is best at, measured precisely, thousands of times over, and have not yet done the thing it finds hardest, which is to say what all that measuring finally means. We can time the flare to the millisecond. We can name the cells, trace their circuits, predict a great deal of behavior from the signal alone. What we cannot yet do is stand back and say, with any real confidence, here is what this signal is, in the end, for. The measuring has run out ahead of the understanding, and there is no shame in that gap, and no genuine need to rush it shut. A mystery that is still standing after this much careful looking is not an embarrassment. It is close to the most honest thing a science can offer, the deep kind of not knowing, the kind you can only arrive at by understanding a great deal first. It is simply where the edge of the light happens to fall tonight on a question this deep. And right now, as you lie here, that half-understood signal is running in every sleeping skull on the planet, in billions of brains at once, in the dark, doing whatever it is doing, by mechanisms no one has fully explained, on behalf of people who will never once give it a thought. It is sorting the day in some of them, drawing others down into a dream, holding a few of them just short of sleep. It has built every want and every reach and every getting up of every one of those lives, and it will go on running in all of them tonight, faithfully, and still keeping a part of its secret, one of the most consequential signals in the brain, working as it always has, in the dark. But of all those billions, there is only one you are inside. So let the rest of the world's brains go, and the whole vast frontier of the unknown along with them, and come back the short distance to this one, the single nervous system you happen to be, here, in this room, in the quiet, with the wanting already gone soft and the night coming on. Because whatever the signal finally turns out to mean for all of them, it is about to do one specific and ordinary thing in you. It is about to let you go. It is already beginning, this letting go, as you lie here, quietly, underneath everything. The wanting is winding down. The thing that ran you all day, that pulled you out of bed and through the hours and from each finished thing to the next unfinished one, is easing its grip. In a little while you will want nothing at all. And here is the strange part, the one you can feel the soft edge of right now. You will not catch the moment it happens. You cannot watch yourself stop wanting, because the watching is itself a kind of wanting, a leaning toward, a reaching of the attention, and it goes quiet along with the rest. It is the same reason no one has ever caught the instant they fell asleep. The one who would catch it is part of what dissolves. And it is the wanting itself that is doing the releasing, because the same signal that makes you want is also, it turns out, a great deal of what keeps you awake. There is an experiment that shows this with an almost eerie clarity. In mice, the dopamine cells we have been following all this time, the ones in that small hub at the base of the brain, turn out to be a wakefulness switch every bit as much as a wanting one. Quiet those cells, and the mouse cannot keep itself awake, no matter what you set in front of it. Not tempting food after a long hunger, not the presence of a mate, not even the smell of a predator close by. The one signal that ought to snap any animal into alarm. With those cells stilled, the mouse calmly gathers itself a nest and lies down to sleep, in the face of everything that should be keeping it on its feet, and fire the same cells, and a sleeping mouse is awake again in 2 or 3 seconds. Staying awake, it turns out, is partly an act of wanting, and much of what holds the lights on is the very system that spends the day reaching for things, which changes what falling asleep even is. It does not happen to you despite the wanting system, it happens through it. To cross over into sleep, the steady background hum of that system, the low, constant tone of wanting that runs under your whole waking day, has to fall. So the dimming of your wanting and the dimming of your wakefulness tonight are the same event, the same dial easing down, the same tone fading towards silence. The reason you can barely want anything just now, the reason the day's pulls have all gone soft and far away, is the very same reason you are able to sleep at all. The wanting is winding itself down, and in winding down, it is letting you go. Think for a moment about what brought you here. Some hours ago, a small pull of wanting made you choose this. Reach for it, press play, decide to spend an evening on the strange machinery you happen to be made of. The same signal kept you here, choosing to stay, settling in, paragraph after paragraph. And now that same signal, having carried you all the way to the edge of sleep, is the thing quietly stepping back, dissolving the very wanting that pressed play. You have been using the wanting to learn about the wanting, the whole way down, and now the lesson, and the listener, and the wanting itself are all coming to rest together. It leaves a strange question hanging, lying here in the dark, one no one has ever cleanly answered. If the wanting is part of what holds your waking self together, the reaching, the attending, the constant going toward, then what is it that remains as the wanting fades? Is the you of the day the wanting itself, thinning out now, so that there is less and less of that self here to fall asleep? Or is there something underneath it? Something that was there all along and only comes into view as the wanting clears, the way the stars come out, not by arriving, but as the light around them is slowly turned down. No one knows which. It is not even certain the question has a clean shape. But you can feel it being asked right now, in your own settling. The sense that the daytime self, the wanting one, is quietly thinning, and that something stiller is being left in its place. And the wanting does not simply go out, like a candle pinched dark. It goes somewhere. In a while, when you drop down into the dreaming part of the night, those same wanting cells will burst back to life, firing on the recordings, in bursts that look much like the firing of an animal in the middle of something it badly wants. The system that is going quiet in you now will come back online inside the dream, off its leash, no longer tethered to the real world or to your real, still body. There is a long-standing idea, argued over, far from settled, that this is where dreams themselves come from, not the eye-flicker machinery of dreaming sleep, but this wanting and seeking system, running loose in the dark, building a world for you to want things in. The hints are real. People with damage to those deep wanting circuits can stop dreaming altogether, even while the outward signs of dreaming sleep carry on without them. And the drugs that raise dopamine tend to make dreams longer, stranger, more vivid, and now and then tip them into nightmares. So the wanting you are laying down tonight is not snuffed out so much as handed on, passed in a few minutes to a dreaming brain that will use it to build whole worlds and then go chasing things through them while you lie here perfectly still, wanting for nothing at all. In about 90 minutes, your brain will slip into its first dream of the night, and the wanting will flare up inside it. You will want things in there, reach for them, chase them, with the very machinery that is going still in you now. Through the rest of the night, the wanting will rise and fall, dream by dream, lit and dimmed, a tide running on without you. And toward morning, long before you are anywhere near awake, it will gather itself once more, and the first faint pull of a new day will begin to form, the wanting returning to its post, ready to run you through another round of reaching. But all of that is hours away, and none of it asks a thing of you now. For now, there is only this, the dial easing down, the tone going soft, the long days wanting finally, gratefully, setting you free. And as it sets you free, it leaves the last question of all hanging gently in the dark, the one this whole long night has been circling without ever asking it outright. If so much of what you call yourself is this, the reaching, the pursuing, the wanting, the very signal winding down now towards sleep, then what, exactly, is the you that remains when the wanting is gone? Who has been lying here, listening, all this time? And who is it, in another moment or two, that is finally going to let go? Let the question sit there, unanswered, for a moment, because it deserves more than a quick reply, and because you happen to be, right now, in almost the only state from which it can be felt, rather than merely thought. Here, at the very edge of sleep, with the wanting nearly wound all the way down, you are as close as a person ever comes to meeting it directly. Who is left when the wanting is gone? What is the self underneath the signal? This long night has quietly moved the ground you stand on. We began with the smallest, most ordinary thing, a hand reaching for a phone, a wanting that ran a little ahead of the having, and we followed it all the way down until it turned out the reaching was not a small thing at all. It is most of what a day is made of. The getting up, the going toward, the pursuit of the next thing and the next, the drive that made you choose this and stay with it hour after hour, the goals you carry, the future you lean into, the whole forward motion of a life, all of it runs on this one signal, this wanting, a few cells firing in the dark. And if that is so, then a great part of what you have always called yourself, your ambitions, your appetites, the very engine of your reaching, is, at bottom, a chemistry, a signal, a tide of dopamine rising and falling in the dark behind your eyes. That can sound like a loss the first time it lands, as if the self were being dissolved into mere mechanism, talked down into a squirt of chemistry. But lying here, at the edge of sleep, with the proof of it happening inside you, it does not feel like a loss at all. It feels, if anything, like a kind of release. Because if the wanting is a signal, something that rises and falls, that a pill can turn up and the night can turn down, that wound you tight all day and is loosening now of its own accord, then it was never the Iron Master it spent your life pretending to be. It is a tide, not a tyrant, and a tide is a thing you can let go out. There is a permission hidden in that if you want it, and it may be the most useful thing the whole night has to give. You can stop taking the wanting quite so personally. Every pull you felt today, every reach, every restless need to check or get or do, you can hold it now a little more lightly, knowing what it is, a signal doing its ancient job, the same in you as in the rat at its lever, the mouse beside its food, the man at his machine. No verdict on your character, no final truth about your soul, and what you can hold lightly, you can also, when the time comes, set down. The time is now. You are setting it down. Underneath even that lies the question you cannot quite answer, the one this whole story has been carrying toward you since the first sentence. When the wanting finishes winding down tonight, is there someone still here, underneath it, quiet and waiting? Or is the wanting most of what you are, so that you simply thin toward nothing as it fades, the way a sound fades, with no one left behind to notice the silence? No one knows. Not really. For all the cells we can count and the flares we can time to the millisecond, no one can yet say where the wanting ends and the self begins, or whether there is any clean seam between them at all. It may be the deepest open question there is, and you are lying inside it right now. And the question has set you somewhere strange. You did not study any of this from a safe distance, the way you might study a far-off star or the floor of the sea. The thing under examination all night has been the very thing doing the examining. You have been studying the wanting with the wanting, watching the signal with a mind the signal helps to build, the rarest kind of mirror, in which the looking and the looked at are made of the same stuff. No telescope has ever had to wonder what it was. You do, and that is either the strangest predicament in the universe or the most ordinary one, depending on the night. Tonight, it is simply yours to rest inside, because here is the gift folded into the not knowing. You do not need the answer to do the thing you are about to do. You can feel the wanting thinning right now, and you can feel, can't you, that something is still here, present, watching it thin. Or perhaps you can feel yourself thinning gently along with it, with no alarm in it whatsoever. Either way, the letting go is already underway, and it has never once in the whole history of living things required anyone to first solve the riddle of who was doing the letting go. You spent this evening learning how your own wanting works, using that very wanting to do the learning. And now the thing studied, and the one who studied it, are coming to rest in the same bed, at the same hour, as one. You were the phenomenon the whole time, and the phenomenon is allowed, now, to stop. So gather the night up, one last time, and let it settle into something you can carry down with you. We took the word everyone uses, the pleasure chemical, and found almost nothing of pleasure in it. We watched a creature starve beside food it still loved because the wanting was gone while the liking remained. We met a signal that fires not for reward but for surprise, and learned that it is, at heart, a teacher, the quiet tutor that shaped, error by error, everything you ever came to want. We found the handful of cells that carry all of it, 500,000 of them, running the whole vast country of a life from the dark. We saw the same chemistry freeze a man for decades, and then, restored, let him stand and read and weep, and say that he had been hungry and yearning all his life, and now was full. We followed the wanting into its traps, the drug that forces a flare which never fades, the craving that outgrows every pleasure, the small bright machines built to hold us by it. And we came, at the last, to the honest edge, where the people who know the most are the first to say how much of it is still dark. And what it all comes to, in the end, is something quieter and larger than any single fact. To be a mind that wants is to be a creature for whom the world is never quite flat, for whom there is always something, somewhere, worth crossing a room to reach. Far from being your flaw or your enemy, the wanting is the engine of your aliveness, the thing that makes anything matter enough to move toward, the reason the morning has any pull in it at all. The same signal that traps the addict and powers the slot machine is the one that got your ancestors up off the ground and out into the world, that draws you toward the people you love, that made you curious enough to spend a whole evening on the strange machinery of your own desire. It is the most human thing about you, and knowing at last what it is does not cheapen it. It only lets you hold it and forgive yourself, with a gentleness you could never quite manage while you believed it was simply who you were. There is one last thing to say, the deepest thing of all, and then you can let go. Everything we have traced tonight, the flare, the cells, the circuits, the chemistry of the wanting, is, seen from the outside, a public thing. It can be measured, recorded, timed to the millisecond, drawn on a chart and shown to a room full of strangers. But the wanting itself, the thing you actually feel, the pull in the chest, the lean toward the world, the ache of desiring something, is the most private thing there is. No instrument has ever caught it from the outside. The felt quality of it, the what it is like. You can record the dopamine. You cannot record the wanting. And here is the mystery that no amount of careful measuring has ever closed, the one the honest scientists leave standing in the room. Those two things, the public flare on the chart and the private pull in you, are somehow the same event, seen from two sides. The mechanism from without, the experience from within, how the firing becomes the feeling, how the measurable turns into the felt, no one knows, and it is not at all clear that more data will ever say. But you do not have to solve it in order to be it. You are, at this very moment, the one place in the universe where this particular signal is not only fired but felt, where the public and the private are the same event, happening in the dark to you. So let it go now. There is nothing left to learn tonight, and nothing left to want. All through the dark house of your skull, the lights are going out, room by room, the wanting dimming, the reaching falling still, the long day's pursuit finally lying down. The organ that has spent your whole life in total darkness, making every bright thing you have ever seen, is making something else now. It is making the dark, gently, letting the day go out like a held breath you can finally release. You will not feel the moment you cross over, you never have, and you never will, and now you know why. The one who would notice the crossing is the very thing going quiet. The wanting that would mark the threshold is the wanting that is fading, so there will be no one home to catch the instant it happens, no watcher left at the window. And that is not a loss. It is the most natural release there is. Sleep does not come and take you. You simply stop arriving at its edge, and you are already across. Some hours ago you reached for something small, and the wanting ran out ahead of the having, and a gap opened that you had crossed 1,000 times without once looking down. You have looked down into it now. You know what it is. And the stranger creature you turned out to be, run all your life by a signal you never felt, wanting by a chemistry you never chose, is nothing to be afraid of in the dark. It is only you, seen at last a little more clearly, and allowed tonight to rest. And the thing that is letting you go right now is the very thing that carried you here, the wanting that pressed play, that pulled you through the day, that brought you all this way to the edge of sleep. It was your engine all along, your tide, the quiet pull that made a life worth moving through, never the enemy you sometimes took it for, and never the master. It carried you here, and now, having carried you, it is setting you down, softly, in the dark, with nothing left to reach for, and nowhere left to go. There is nothing to do now, nothing to want, nothing to reach for, Nothing left to understand. The wanting has gone quiet. The lights are out. The dark organ is doing the last and gentlest thing it knows how to do, which is to let you go. So let it. You have wanted enough for one day. Rest now.